Hello and welcome to the Basics of Dog Training. My name is Quinn. I'm a certified trainer for the Karen Pryor Academy and a team manager for the National Newfoundland Rescue. You might be thinking, I've had dogs my whole life. Why would I attend a presentation or watch a video about training dogs? But the reality is, you only have so many hours in the day. I want to make training your dog as efficient and as effective as possible. That way, when you do have the time, you won't be making these common dog training mistakes. I want to give you the skills to best give your dog skills. The first thing we need to discuss is that dogs, like humans, learn how to learn. You might notice that the first couple things you teach your dog are very difficult, but as they progress, it becomes easier and easier to teach them new things. So, if you're just starting out, I don't want you to get discouraged. Your dog isn't stupid and you're not bad at training. They need to practice learning and you need to practice teaching. There are many different methods of training. However, the method of training that the NNR recommends is marker-based training. This is a reward style of training where a word or sound marks the moment the dog does the correct thing. The reason this style of training is so effective is that dogs learn best with immediate feedback. However, immediate feedback is not always possible, or it might be incredibly difficult to give if we're trying to deliver a treat in order to give that feedback. So your marker bridges the time between the action and the reward, but you still need to follow up with a reward. In this way, the marker acts as a buffer of time between when the dog does the action and we give the dog a treat. So I want you to think of your marker in these two different analogies. Like previously discussed, your marker is a bridge. It's a buffer time between when the dog does the action and you give them a treat. But it's also kind of like a camera shutter. You're taking a picture of the behavior you want. In fact, sometimes I have people hold up their marker like it's their phone so they can imagine taking a picture of the exact moment the dog does the behavior. Or if you used to use a camera like this, you can imagine holding it like this. We're going to be discussing a couple different styles of markers, but one style that I like to use is a clicker. A clicker is a helpful tool for marking behavior. There are a couple different styles of clickers. There's finger clickers like this that have a little loop for your finger, and they tend to be a little quieter. So they're better for shy dogs or quieter environments like inside. Then there's the traditional star mark style of clicker, which is much louder. And this is better for more confident dogs or louder environments like outdoors. Also, it's very important that when you first introduce a clicker, you wrap it in something like a sweatshirt or towel to muffle the sound. I've often heard people say that their dog is scared of the clicker, and what they accidentally did is they used a loud style of clicker like this, and they didn't wrap it to introduce it. So it was this very loud sound for the dog, which was startling for them. So instead, you can take something like a t-shirt, a sweatshirt, blanket. You can use a quieter style of clicker, wrap it in there, and you'll hear that the sound is very muffled. And this is a good way of introducing the clicker or starting off with it. The other common style of marker would be a vocal marker. This is most often the words yes or good. However, it's worth noting there's some pitfalls to vocal markers. Maybe you say the word yes in other contexts, such as people watching a football game and their team is winning and they're yelling, yes, yes. And that's very confusing for their dog. In fact, our dogs become used to tuning out our voices often throughout the day. It would be really inconvenient if every time we said the word good, our dog paid attention to us. And we were just talking to a conversation on the phone with a family member or something. The other pitfall is people like me who like talking during training. This is called, in dog training terms, keep going signals. And I use them regularly to encourage my dogs to keep going or keep trying. They're almost there. I'm not going to mark it, but it's so close. You're doing so good. Ah, shoot, I used the word good. If good is my marker signal, then now I would have to end that round and give them a treat. A popular question I get about markers overall, and a popular complaint I get about clickers particularly, is that I don't want to use a clicker forever. I don't want to have to remember a clicker every time I'm out with my dog. The reality is, this is a misconception. You do not need to use the dog's marker forever. Markers are only for learning a new skill. Once the dog has learned that skill, we no longer use the marker. I don't carry a clicker with me out on a walk with my dog, and I'm a clicker trainer. Okay, so let's get out of theory for a minute and go ahead and get into the nitty-gritty details of how you would actually marker condition a dog. Step one is where I diverge from many of my dog training colleagues. Many of them would want completely neutral hands prior to the marker, but I have found that this is difficult mechanics for beginners, and I don't want my beginners to make mistakes. So step one, you're going to preload a treat into your hand. So go ahead and grab a treat and have it in your fist, ready to go. Step two, since we preloaded a treat, it's very important that we wait a couple of seconds. I want you to pause. Step three, you're going to go ahead and press the clicker. So go ahead and dispense the clicker. And step four, pay. Follow up with the very special treat. I like to put it in a dog bowl right in front of the dog. So I like to put the dog in a lay down, stay, preload the treat, pause, press the clicker, and drop the treat right into the treat bowl in front of my dog. And I'm going to repeat this process over 3 to 5 minutes until the dog gets it. What I mean by the dog getting it is that at the sound of the clicker, they will show you that they anticipate the treat. This might look like them hearing the clicker and immediately putting their head towards the food bowl, or hearing the clicker and immediately looking up at you. It might be that the sound of the clicker, they start drooling. Whatever it is, they're showing you that the sound of the clicker now is a precursor to them that they know food is coming. It's worth noting that this process is for clicker conditioning only. Once your dog is clicker conditioned and you're training with them, go ahead and mark the behavior and follow up with the reward at a pace that makes sense for you. So this need to mark treat kind of quickly in a row is just for getting the dog to the place where they are marker conditioned. So we're going to go ahead and watch a video of me marker conditioning 2 dogs. Obviously, I've sped up this video. This was over the course of about 4 minutes. So I'm preloading the treat, pausing, clicking, and giving the dog a treat.
Very smart dog.
And I'm looking for these subtle signals that the dog gets it. Sometimes I'll even let the dog look away so that I can click and see if their head snaps back.
We're definitely more enthusiastic about it.
Here's a video of me marker conditioning a second dog. Did you see that nice head snap when he heard the clicker? There you go. Nice head snap showing me that he gets it. So we will be discussing 2 different styles of teaching, capturing and luring. Capturing is where you set up a scenario where the behavior is likely to occur naturally, and luring is where you use a resource the dog wants in order to guide them through or into the behavior. And we're going to be using these 2 different styles of teaching for our dogs to learn 2 real-world skills. For capturing, we're going to teach our dogs look at me. Look at me is useful for engagement, for healing, for an interrupter cue, head orientation, or leave it. And touch is useful for recall training, asking the dog to hold still, maneuvering a dog into a car or crate, or a drop it cue. So again, let's go ahead and transition from theory into hands-on. You need to ask yourself for capturing, when do I see this behavior occur naturally? I'll give you an example from our lives. I was trying to teach our dog Briggs the speak cue where he would bark. However, before he came to us, he wore a bark collar, so he did not offer this behavior naturally, except when someone would knock on the door. Then he would bark. That was the only context where I saw the behavior I wanted occur naturally. So I set up a training scenario in which we would knock at the door, he would bark, and I would capture the behavior. So I want you to go ahead and think to yourself, when would I see a look at me occur naturally with my dogs? Well, with my own dogs, we see it with the stalk game. If you're unfamiliar with what the stalk game is, this is where you might be out in the yard with your dogs, you have toys out, you're playing, maybe they have a toy in their mouth, and all of a sudden you look at them, put your hands up, and start moving towards them slowly. You're stalking them. They'll freeze, they'll look right at you, make eye contact with you, and then run off with the toy or do a play bow or something like that. If that sounds familiar to you, then teaching your dog look at me using the stalk game is a really great opportunity to use capturing. So the steps to capturing eye contact are going to be set up a scenario. Go ahead and set up where you would typically see the behavior occur naturally. Wait patiently. As soon as you see the behavior you want, mark that behavior and go ahead and follow up with a reward. And you're going to repeat this process until the dog is quickly reoffering the desired behavior. There are pitfalls in every training style. The pitfall of capturing is that you need to generalize the behavior. Whenever we talk about generalization, we talk about three different aspects: location, context, and person. The location is often the strongest clue to your dog on what you want them to do. If you were playing the stalk game in the yard and that's where you've always played it with them, then they're going to think that that cue is just for the yard. So as soon as you bring them in the house, you need to do a mini reteach. The context might also become important. So let's say you were playing this game with them in the yard when they had a toy in their mouth. Well, that toy is part of the context clues for them on what to do. So you need to phase that out slowly. And finally, the person might also be an important part of the context for them. So if you would like other people to use this cue, then you need to have them do a mini reteach as well. Here's a photo of Davy Jones doing the sit cue in a pet store. A pet store is not where we initially taught sit. We taught sit at home in our living room. When I expected him to be able to do it at the pet store, I needed to do a mini reteach to generalize that cue to a new location and context. Let's go ahead and watch a video of me teaching two different dogs look at me using the stalk game. One thing I love about this game for teaching look at me is that you'll get really enthusiastic responses.
And it's like
You can always reduce enthusiasm. It's really hard to increase enthusiasm where it wasn't already there. So there you can see I'm reducing the response down to something a little more functional for, say, being out on a walk. And you can also reduce your hand signals for that cue down to something a little more functional. So typically what I do is I start off with both hands in the air in that funny stance, and I reduce it down to where just this kind of give five signal means look at me. So you can reduce both the dog's response and your hand signal cue for that down to something more functional. I think it's important to take a moment and discuss that teaching look at me using the stalk game is not appropriate for every dog. Some dogs have a background in which they have reasons to not trust humans. The human in this situation is putting themselves into a predatory stance for the dog. But most dogs will recognize that as a silly game. But some dogs might be genuinely frightened by this. For dogs who are more shy or fearful or who have a past with humans that isn't always positive, then you may need to come up with another context for teaching look at me. My second favorite way to teach look at me is using begging. So begging is another context where dogs will naturally give us prolonged eye contact that we can then capture and turn into a cue for look at me. Here's a video of Davy Jones begging while I'm sitting having a snack, and it would be a great moment to go ahead and capture that eye contact and teach look at me. The next style of teaching we're going to be using to show our dogs a new skill is luring. This is where we're using a resource to guide them through or into the steps. A really common example of luring might be teaching spin to a dog. Here I am teaching Davy Jones spin. So we're going to be using luring to teach touch, and I want you to do this using chopstick fingers. So you can imagine like a peace sign for your hand, and you put a piece of cheese between it. Put your hand out, lure the dog towards you. Once the dog is at your side, once their nose hits your fingers, you'll go ahead and mark and release the cheese for them. So get your lure, show your dog you have the food between your fingers, put your hand out towards them, let them start to nibble it early, that's fine, but then slowly move your hand into the natural position at your side. And as soon as their snout touches your fingers, you mark and release the cheese as a reward. So remember when we discussed a potential pitfall for capturing? Well, there's also a potential pitfall for luring, and that's that lures can become bribes. So a bribe is something that requires you to show your dog you have something in order to get the behavior you want. In order to get out of this bribery phase quickly, I want you to do the following steps. You're going to get some reps going. So you want your dog to be in a nice, easy rhythm doing the behavior over and over again. Get some reps going. And then all of a sudden, you're going to bait and switch. So you can imagine for touch, you get some reps going where they're doing touch, maybe 5, 6 reps in. Then you're going to trick your dog into following an empty hand. So you're going to pretend to put cheese in your hand. Nothing is there. Put your hand out just like you did before, lure them into position, and as soon as they sniff it, now you mark, reach into your treat pouch, and toss a treat. You will probably need to swap back into bribery mode after one bait and switch rep, and then slowly increase the bait and switch reps that you can do in succession. So now we're going to go ahead and watch a video example of me teaching 2 newfies how to do touch using this chopstick hand method. So I have a piece of cheese between my fingers there. You can see I needed to kind of lure him a little closer towards me. That's okay. Maybe add some enthusiasm using motion and momentum. And now I have nothing between my fingers, but he went for them anyway because he's used to there being cheese there. So we did a bait and switch round, went back into some bribery rounds, and then another bait and switch round. It's the same thing here. Have some cheese between my fingers. I'm luring him towards me. We get a nice, easy rhythm going with lots of successes. And then I go ahead and bait and switch. This is where I have nothing between my fingers. And I mark and follow up with a reward. A super common mistake that I see from people is that they name the cue as they're teaching the dog the cue. So they say the name, such as sit, while they're teaching their dog how to sit. While this is super common, unfortunately, it is an error. So when should you name a cue? You should name a cue when you would be willing to gather a little crowd to show off your dog's new skill, or maybe even bet money that your dog can do the thing. And what I mean by this is when you're feeling really confident that the next round, the dog will definitely do the skill, then you slip the name or hand gesture, if you want it to be hand gesture, in that you want to represent that cue. This may be a little confusing and it might be different than what you've done previously. So I'm going to go ahead and show a video of me naming a cue for Davy Jones. What I wanted is I wanted him putting his head down and fully relaxing his body to be on cue. Sometimes when it's the evenings and my other dogs are in the room, he can be a normal puppy and a little hyper. So I want him to know when it's time to settle. And I would like the name for this cue to be making the sh sound with him. So when did I add that name? When did I start adding the sh sound? Well, you can see in this video when that is. So I'm teaching him the cue and I am not saying the name of the cue. I'm teaching him how to lay his head all the way down, capturing that, marking and rewarding it. And once it becomes very reliable and predictable, meaning I would be willing to bet money he's going to do it. Now I add the name of the cue. And mark and reward. Now, this skill for him would be what we call on cue. One of my most frequently asked questions from people is, when can I phase out treats? And this is a really good question. So in order to think about this or conceptualize it, let's think how we might phase out unwanted behavior. Well, we would stop reinforcing that behavior. So if you don't want to see a behavior, you shouldn't reinforce that behavior. Well, I think you can now see the mistake here. Oops, the opposite is then true. If we want to keep seeing a behavior, we need to keep reinforcing that behavior. Which you might be thinking when you hear that, but I've heard if I don't reward a behavior all the time, then it's like a slot machine, right? Who hasn't heard that in a puppy training class? Your dog trainer is standing up there and they say, you should only reward intermittently. And then it's like a casino game or a slot machine, and the dog will want to do it even more. The truth is, I know a lot of dog trainers who say this in a class and who would never do it with their own dog. And the reason is that this whole casino rumor is mostly false. It's not true for about 99% of contexts in which we want our dogs to do something. The reason this rumor in theory is right, but in practicality is wrong, is this. The payout for not listening to you is most likely a much more biologically addicting scenario. So think of chasing a squirrel instead of doing recall, or dragging you on leash to go greet another dog. The payout, the slot machine payout for not listening to you, that's so much more rewarding and biologically addicting to them than anything we could manufacture or create. So if you really want to play like this kind of casino game with your dog, then always reward, but sometimes a jackpot reward. So give them consistent rewards for doing a behavior, but every once in a while, make it the best reward they can imagine. It is also worth noting that I often hear this from dog guardians as what is ultimately an excuse not to reward good behavior because they're being a little bit lazy about that. So when we think about phasing out treats, the first thing we want to consider is that we need to keep reinforcing behavior in order to continue seeing that behavior. The second thing we want to think about is that you need to feed your dogs every day for the rest of their life anyway. That's not optional. That's part of just owning a dog. And as a behavior gains a longer reinforcement history, it becomes easier and easier to maintain it, and smaller reinforcements will maintain that behavior. First couple times I ask my dog to sit when they're a puppy, I might need to use cheese or hot dogs, and I might need to make it really exciting. But my dogs are seniors now. Their reinforcement history for sit is so long and so consistent that at this point, oftentimes when I ask them to sit, I just use a piece of kibble. So, what reinforcement was required at the beginning for them to learn a skill is not the reinforcement that is necessary to maintain a skill once you've built up a good reinforcement history. Easy, well-rehearsed behaviors can be maintained with mostly just kibble and an occasional treat. And the third thing is that not everything needs to be a food reward. Environmental rewards, praise, and games are all reinforcement as well. So treats are not the only way you can maintain a behavior. You can also use things like smells on a walk or saying hello to a new person or dog, toys, praise, pets, anything your dog likes. Just make sure it's something your dog actually likes. I think there's a useful story here of a client I had where they wanted petting their dog to be reinforcement for that dog out on a walk or sitting while other dogs walked by. So I asked them to show me what that looked like outside of their house. And I always record training sessions. So I recorded a video of them asking their dog to sit outside, and then they went and patted the dog's head. And when we played back the video, it was very obvious to see that the dog's ears went back. They kind of put their head down a little bit. They didn't even like the petting, which means that if anything, that's not reinforcing that behavior. It's discouraging that behavior. And in reality, it was just that the person didn't want to bring treats with them out on a walk. They couldn't forget their hands, but they often forgot their treat pouch. So it was truly just laziness from the human. The advice I would give people who are tempted to try to use these environmental rewards as a way to get out of needing to bring treats is to make the environmental rewards harder than bringing treats. I'll give you an example with my own dog. So Briggs loves stuffed animals, and he loves playing this game called Find, where he finds a scent in a stuffed animal. It's a game we've played in the home, we've played in classes. He loves this game so much. So I brought him to the woods, but what he didn't realize is that ahead of time, I had hidden a couple of his scent stuffed animals. As we're out there, I ask him to come to me, I ask him to sit, and then I say the magic words, Briggs, find. And he runs off and gets to find his favorite stuffy using this scent game, which is just the best game for him. And then we play tag a little bit. That setup was much harder for me than just grabbing some cheese and sticking it in my treat pouch or grabbing some treats and throwing it in my treat pouch. If your environmental reward is easier than bringing treats, you might accidentally be mistaking stinginess for savviness. So one of the fears I think fueling this behavior from humans is that they don't want their dog to only listen for food. They don't want to accidentally be out and about, run out of treats, and then their dogs won't listen to them anymore. And this is a valid fear, but it's also a fixable fear. If that's a fear of yours, then your dog knows whether or not you have food on you, and that's your fault. You're not being creative enough, and you need to learn to outsmart your dog in this way. Don't worry, I'll explain what I mean. Kathy Sadeo, in her book, Plenty in Life is Free, has this great story about hamburgers that grow on trees, and it really stuck in my head and is something that I use often with my clients. So an excerpt from her book, which I highly recommend purchasing, is this. I used to hide hamburgers in the branches of trees along a wooded trail I'd later hike with my off-leash dogs. This gave me the opportunity to cue a recall, and after I'd mark their success with a yes, and we'd run together to the meat-bearing tree. I'd stand on tiptoes, stretching to grab the hidden hamburgers, and then toss one to each dog. The surprise of receiving such an astounding prize often paralyzes dogs the first time it happens, but they quickly figure out how to gleefully wolf down their reward. Your dog ought to think that you are a food magician. Their behavior plus you means that good things magically appear. So how you might play this treat magician game at home is you go ahead and grab some treats and place them around your house in airtight containers. You don't have to use airtight containers if your dog isn't the kind of dog to sniff stuff out. And they should be up high where your dog can't get them without a little human help. Do this when your dog is not in the home or not watching you. So either they are asleep or they're outside going potty or something like that. Once you've hidden the treats or the containers around the house, your dog is then going to come inside. You wait a little bit of time, show them you don't have any treats on you, and start off with an easy cue. Ask them to look at you, ask them to do a touch, something they like doing. Make sure this is nice and simple for them. We're not trying to test our dog, we're trying to surprise our dog. And then once they do the cue, you'll reach back into your candle or whatever it was up on a shelf and go ahead and give the dog the treat. And they will be so surprised that you're able to just pull treats out of nowhere. With a little extra creativity, you can even play this game out in the real world. On a walk, you can go ahead and walk the loop first ahead of your dog and hide some treats. Then take your treat pouch off, leave it on a picnic table or something, walk away. Your dog will be like, "What are you doing? We don't have any treats now." And ask them to do something simple. And again, like Kathy Sadeo said, pull a hamburger out of a tree. It doesn't have to be a hamburger, it can just be a treat. The message to your dog will be the same, that if I listen to my human, they have this amazing ability to just pull food out of inanimate objects like a magician. Another thing you can do is plan a meet cute. So when my husband used to work away from home, so he was gone for 2 weeks and then home for a week, when he would get back from these long business trips, I would plan a meet cute with him. So you can imagine I'm at a park with my dog. I know he is pulled up, but they don't know that. I'm texting him or whatever. And I say, "Okay, stand behind that tree over there." And I go over, I ask my dog to do something like sit or recall or something like that, and boom, my husband just appears out from behind a tree. What an amazing reward for them, and what an amazing reinforcement that they think that I have this magical ability to make their favorite human beings appear out of nowhere. The other thing you can use is vending machines. So a vending machine is great because dogs already think it's probably magic. Also food trucks, things like that. Go ahead and put some coins in, get something in the vending machine, walk around Lowe's or whatever it is, ask your dog to do some commands, and then boom, pull out, a little bit of those peanut butter crackers or something like that. And if losing your dog in public without food on you is your worst fear, then go ahead and practice this. What I mean by that is you can practice taking your treat pouch off, having some food hidden ahead of time, and you can even start to begin leash dropping. So I start this with a long line, of course, so that I can step on it or grab it if the dog doesn't do what I want. But you can work up to a shorter and shorter leash, to the point now where I practice with my dogs accidentally dropping the leash without treats on me. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And then ask them to come to me, and boom, food comes out from nowhere. So they believe in magic. They believe I am a treat magician. So we're going to go ahead and watch a video of me playing this game with my dogs. Do you say I take the treat pouch off, and at first she's like, "Wait a minute, don't leave our treat pouch, Mom." But she go ahead and listens to me and is rewarded with cheese from a tree. Now, I wish that the basics of dog training only ever included good behavior and never included bad behavior, but our dogs do sometimes do things that we don't want them to do. So a good question would be, when and how do I correct bad behavior? And since we're discussing unwanted behavior, we also need to discuss punishment. Physical and harsh punishments do work. They do deter unwanted behavior. I won't deny that. However, studies have shown that it is not more or less effective than reward-based training, even for severe behaviors such as aggression. Now, that might sound confusing to folks who swear by that you need to use punishment methods for difficult dogs or for the fastest results. And the people who say that need to remember that more recent studies have shown that the easiest method of dog training is the one you are used to. So this may seem somewhat intuitive, but they actually studied it. They had dog trainers who use a particular method, either reward-based or punishment-based training methods, swap. So they had them work with dogs using the methods they don't typically use. And what they saw is what we would expect. They saw that the most effective method of dog training is the one they were used to using. And as soon as they needed to switch methods, it became harder. This is obvious, right? Change is hard. Learning a new way is hard. But that doesn't make the new way worse. So you might be thinking, then why should I change? If it's more effective and easier for me to use the method I have been using, if that's punishment, then why change? Well, punishment has been studied and shown to increase the risk of fearful and aggressive behavior in dogs. This isn't just me saying this. Again, these are old studies and they're repeated studies up until modern day. And then the common feedback I get from people is, well, those must have not been well-timed punishments. But actually, the majority of these studies had professionals applying the punishment. So it's not to do with the timing, it's just to do with the method. Punishment-based training methods, physical punishments, increase the risk of fearful and aggressive behavior. There is a reason for this that we can somewhat conceptualize here in this presentation. Those who utilize punishment like to think of it as a chisel, where you can delicately chisel away at one particular behavior. But punishment is a lot more like tear gas. You can aim it at one thing, but it will dissipate and taint everything in its surroundings. So for example, let's say you're walking your dog on a prong collar. The dog sees another dog out on a walk, and what do you think they do? Imagine they're a puppy. What are they going to do? They're going to pull towards that other dog, and boom, they get a prong collar correction. Now we know, the human knows, that that correction was because the dog was pulling. We want to chisel away at that one behavior, pulling. But for the dog, it's a lot more like tear gas. Everything in the surroundings might now be tainted. So that puppy who pulled towards the other dog and was given that correction, that harsh physical correction, now might view other dogs out on walks as a bad or scary thing. And I don't think it's too much for anyone to imagine how that can become much more problematic than simply pulling on leash. As a dog trainer, I can say dealing with a reactive dog who has been punishment trained is incredibly difficult behavior modification. Dealing with a puppy who pulls on leash is not difficult behavior modification. So we're essentially taking what was a small problem behavior and turning it into potentially a massive problem behavior. I love this quote, correct the training, not the dog. So then how do we deal with unwanted behaviors? Some dog trainers will even tell you that positive reinforcement trainers don't deal with unwanted behaviors. We simply ignore them. And that's just not true. That's a myth. We do absolutely deal with unwanted behaviors. We just do so in a more systematic way. But I can teach you that system. So step one to dealing with an unwanted behavior is management. Management is the foundation. When your dog begins doing something that you would like to see less of, the first thing you need to do is stop and figure out a management solution. Management refers to environmental solutions to problems. So these would typically be gates, crates, leashes, putting away food items, or something like that. A common example would be if a dog is getting into the trash can, the management solution would be putting the trash can in a closet. Here's a management solution that a foster came up with for a dog who was chewing the remote. They put the remote in a jar, and therefore the dog no longer has access to it. Here's an example of me with Davy Jones. He has a tendency to jump on me when I come home, so I put a gate around the door so that he can't jump on me when I get home. Management is creating a world that fits your dog versus training, which is creating a dog that fits your world. So we have creating a world that fits our dog versus creating a dog that fits our world. And whenever I say this, people always say, yeah, that one. I want the dog that fits my world. Of course they do, right? But you can't have one without the other. Management is the first step. So it's not which dog do I want, it's where is my dog at in their training journey right now. You need management before you can do training. So management comes prior to the training. Management is the first step. Once you have successful management, then you would move on to training. But training should happen in a controlled, intentional setting. Training should not happen on the fly. This is one of the most common mistakes I see with my training clients. They are training their dogs on the fly. I'll give you an example. Recently, I showed up to somebody's house to work with their dog. Their big issue was that the dog was counter surfing and stealing items off the counter while they were trying to make dinner. This woman, as a busy mom of 3 kids, was really frustrated with this behavior. And so I asked her, are you currently working on it? And she said, yes. She said, when I'm trying to make dinner, I'll even have treats on me. And if the dog comes near me, I try to get him to sit, and then I turn around and I'm cooking again. And then I turn around and he's already doing it again. He's grabbing something off the counter and running off with it. So I try to run after him, get it back, trade him for a treat, and all the stuff. And her heart was certainly in the right place. She was trying to work with her dog, but she was not working with her dog in a controlled, intentional setting. She was training him on the fly. We would call that reactive training. And being reactive in your teaching or training is a good way to become frustrated with your dog and for your dog to become distrusting of you. So we want to be proactive in our training and teaching, not reactive. You want to teach your dog their skills or cues in a controlled context all the way to fluency. If you're unfamiliar with this word fluency, it has 2 components. The first component of fluency is a dog mastering a cue with distance, distraction, and duration. Sometimes these are called the 3 Ds of dog training. I'm sure you've heard them before. I like to think of these 3 Ds, distance, distraction, and duration, as difficulty knobs. So whenever one is all the way up, we need to try to wiggle the other 2 down. And if all 3 are all the way up, that is a really difficult situation for your dog to be in. You should be increasing these knobs incrementally and individually. So your dog should learn new cues from close up. So let's go ahead and move that distance knob all the way down. They should learn new cues in a calm setting. Let's go ahead and move that distraction knob all the way down. And you should only expect them to be able to do the cue for a split second. So let's move that duration knob all the way down. So let's go ahead and remember the situation where we had the dog stealing things off the counter. There was some distance involved. She wanted her dog to go off and sit away from her on his bed. There was a lot of distraction involved. Not only is there food out, but there's a lot of fun sounds going on, a lot of movement. It's a very distracting environment. And there was duration involved. Cooking dinner does not take a split second. Cooking dinner takes 30, 40 minutes, maybe even an hour of time. There was definitely duration involved. That is not the context to be teaching your dog a new cue like place on a bed. Instead, we want to view this as the teaching zone, where we're at a close distance, where there's no distractions, and we're not expecting any duration. In that situation, what I recommended to that client was to use management while she's cooking dinner. So the dog went in his crate or was put behind a gate while she cooked dinner. He no longer had access to the thing that was getting him in trouble. And then we began setting up scenarios where she pretended to cook dinner. So she would get all her cutting boards out and everything. She would stay close by him, put him on his place cue bed, and at a close distance, ask for sit in a calm setting. So no cooking is actually going on. It's calm setting, and only expect it for a split second. And then we slowly increase these knobs one at a time incrementally until the dog was able to handle the situation that she initially wanted him to handle. So let's go ahead and watch a video of me working on cues with my dogs with distance, distraction, and duration.
Just a little. Wait. Sit.
To begin adding distance, I'll often use the wait cue. Here I wanted my dog to be able to do paw at a distance. So I would put food in front of him, ask him to wait, add some distance, and then ask for a paw. Eventually, I was able to remove food from the situation altogether and just have some distance. For distraction, I like to toggle between asking your dog to train with you and doing something very distracting and fun, like having them play with a toy. Then toggle back into training mode. Eventually, you can even merge these so that there's the distraction of play going on while they're thinking and listening. For duration, it's important to think exponentially. The hardest part for the dog is the first 0 to 1 seconds of doing the cue. But the difference for them between 3 to 5 seconds is often not that difficult. The other component of fluency is generalization. Remember, we discussed generalization when we talked about the pitfalls of capturing, so I won't discuss it again. But basically, you need to reteach the dog their skill in a new location, in a new context, and with new people. So now that you've managed the situation, you've trained the situation proactively, not reactively, in a controlled context. Now you begin the process of application. Now you begin taking the training, taking those new skills, and applying them to a real-world setting where the dog previously had an unwanted behavior. You can go ahead and reduce management gradually and set expectations appropriately. You want to intervene before there's failure. So the nice thing about using this method for teaching a dog who previously had an undesirable behavior in a context, a new skill, is that if you've already come up with management solutions and you're used to using those, then when the dog is having an off day, you can go ahead and just reapply your management. Dog training isn't linear for dogs. They're going to have great days, they're going to have not so great days, but you just want to be trending upward. And before you know it, you'll have a dog who is reliably doing the wanted behavior in the context where they had previously been doing an unwanted behavior. Thank you so much for tuning in to the basics of dog training. I hope you're feeling ready to begin working with your dog on all sorts of new skills and you feel confident as their teacher.